Why did Germany fail in World War I? And only 20 years later managed to rise rapidly, even nearly conquer all of Europe? What exactly did Germany go through during this time? On November 11, 1918, Germany, after losing World War I, was defeated by Western powers like Britain and France. To prevent Germany from rising again, they forced Germany to sign the unfair Treaty of Versailles. Germany had to cede 1/5 of its territory, along with all overseas colonies, and pay war reparations of 150 billion marks. This move by Germany soon influenced a large number of Germans, leading to widespread demonstrations and protests at home. This triggered strong dissatisfaction among the people. To restore the German economy, German Chancellor Hindenburg used a stopgap measure, which was to rely on continuous money printing to ease domestic tensions. But this action quickly backfired. Due to excessive currency issuance, the German mark experienced unprecedented devaluation, especially during the year 1922. 900 marks in Germany could only exchange for $1. At the height of the mark's devaluation, a loaf of bread could astonishingly cost 500,000 marks, and this money couldn't even fit in a car. It can be said that Germany's economy had completely collapsed, and at this very moment, a man named Hitler led the Nazi Party. He early on traveled between Germany's major beer halls, delivering passionate speeches that expressed at the time Germany's various economic and political problems. He told these desperate people that since you have no other choice, then join my party. He also often promised that German citizens would all own their own cars. No more bread costing 500,000 marks. Eventually, they would tear up the shameful Versailles Treaty. Under his inflammatory speech, support for the Nazi Party grew rapidly. By 1932, the Nazi Party had become the largest party in Germany. Eventually, Hitler also won 3 million votes in the public election, becoming the Führer of Germany. He began to vigorously develop heavy industry and military equipment, but due to the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles by Britain and France, Germany's army was limited to no more than 100,000 troops. The size of the navy was also strictly limited, and air force was not allowed, including naval aviation and any military aircraft, just as Hitler was at a loss. The United States suddenly extended a helping hand to Germany, to prevent Britain and France from dominating Europe, and affecting its own hegemony. The United States decided. They provided Germany with a $16 billion loan. Their goal was to use Germany to contain Britain and France. With strong support from the United States, Germany began secretly, recklessly expanding its military. But before Nazi Germany became truly powerful, Hitler had to invent various excuses to conceal future military developments. Then Hitler used the excuse of producing civilian aircraft and tractors to secretly produce thousands of airplanes and tanks, as well as armored vehicles and artillery. Since the Treaty of Versailles didn't allow Germany to establish an air force openly, it openly founded an aviation club. Hitler increased Germany's police force to 800,000. This irrational action completely disregarded the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany's military strength rapidly grew as a result. Hitler believed that only by developing a powerful military could he break the chains of Britain and France imposed on Germany. So Hitler spared no effort, risking everything for the nation. Full-scale development of the military industry began. Military spending increased day by day. By 1938, Germany's army had expanded to 1.8 million troops. The total military expenditure reached 50% of the national economy, ranking first in the world. At this time, Hitler finally couldn't hold back his own wolfish ambition for expansion. In March 1938, Hitler began a bloodless conquest of the oil-rich country Austria. Strangely, Britain and France ignored Germany's invasion actions. This made Hitler even more arrogant. With abundant oil resources, Nazi Germany's national strength was greatly enhanced. On March 15, Hitler began forcibly occupying Czechoslovakia. At this point, Britain and France finally could no longer sit idly by, so they warned Hitler that if Germany continued to forcibly invade European countries, Britain and France declare war on Germany. But by this point, Hitler had completely lost his mind. He believed Britain and France were too weak and incapable to dare to confront Germany in a direct war. Soon after, Hitler began to focus on his next target for invasion, Poland. On August 23, 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Soviet-German Non-Aggression Pact. Between these two non-neighboring countries, their border was surprisingly drawn within Poland. Clearly, this was a pact to divide Poland, and it also signaled that war was imminent. On the early morning of September 1, 1939, Germany deployed 1.5 million troops, dividing their forces into 3 routes. Begin the blitzkrieg against Poland. Thus, World War II officially begins. Germany starts employing lightning tactics, advancing rapidly and fiercely, like a hot knife through butter. The 19th Panzer Division led by Guderian charging recklessly on the battlefield, unstoppable. On September 3, Britain and France officially declared war on Germany. Although on the surface, Britain and France had declared war on Germany, in reality, they never sent a single soldier to aid Poland. They silently watched as Poland was consumed by Germany. This is known as the policy of appeasement. Faced with the powerful German offensive, Poland suffered heavy losses, and retreated step by step. On September 17, the Soviet Union also didn't want to be left out. It began invading Poland from the east. Under the joint pressure of Germany and the Soviet Union, Poland was doomed to defeat. On October 6, 1939, Poland held out for only 35 days, before being completely occupied by Germany and the Soviet Union. On November 26, 1939, the Soviet Union suddenly amassed 1 million troops along the Finnish border, and launched a massive attack against Finland. In the eyes of many, this would be a crushing victory for the Soviet Union. However, this war took everyone by surprise. Facing the powerful Soviet invasion, Finland did not back down. The Finnish army took defensive measures, making use of the cold winter, the freezing swamps, and vast forests as advantageous terrain, initiated various guerrilla tactics, inflicted heavy blows on the Soviet army. The war lasted only 3 months. The Soviet Union lost 400,000 soldiers, 22 divisions were destroyed. After the war, the Soviet Union only occupied 1/10 of Finland's territory. The Soviet Union may have won the war but lost its reputation. This showed Hitler the weakness of the Soviet military power. This Winter War laid the groundwork for Germany's later invasion of the Soviet Union. In April 1940, Germany aimed to secure more war resources. Hitler then set his sights on Northern Europe. On April 9, German forces launched a lightning attack on Denmark. Because Denmark was a weak nation, German troops took only 4 hours to occupy the entire country of Denmark. Then, German forces began their invasion of Norway. Since Norway is a coastal country, so this time, the German army mainly used the Navy and Air Force, as well as multiple tactics involving warship landings, preparing to launch an all-out attack on Norway. Because the German invasion took place at night, the Norwegian army was completely unprepared. In just 12 hours, the Norwegian capital was captured by Germany. Even though the British and French armies successively reinforced Norway, it was still to no avail. Norway held out for only 60 days, before surrendering to Germany. Subsequently, Nazi Germany took Luxembourg within a day, captured the Netherlands in 5 days, and occupied Belgium in 18 days. After occupying these countries, Hitler then turned his focus to France. At that time, France boasted the European First Army, with up to 3 million soldiers, and built an impregnable Maginot Line along the German-French border. If a direct conflict with the French army occurred, they wouldn't gain any advantage at all. Hitler was even more restless and anxious about this. At this time, the famous German General Manstein began to offer suggestions to Hitler. He believed the German army should attack France head-on through Belgium, to lure out the British and French Allied forces, and then, the German army once again bypasses the Maginot Line through the Ardennes forest. Finally, they surround and eliminate them. This suggestion was quickly adopted by Hitler. On May 10, 1940, a large number of German armored units began to cross the Ardennes forest, bypassing the seemingly impregnable Maginot Line. They launched an attack toward mainland France, and also struck at the rear of the British-French Allied forces. Under the unstoppable German offensive, the British-French Allied forces were caught off guard, and were steadily pushed back, all the way to the French port of Dunkirk. Then, with the reinforcement of countless British vessels, 400,000 British-French troops were gradually evacuated to Britain. Then, the armored units of Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, began their lightning-fast attack across the plains of France. The German army used Blitzkrieg tactics, and quickly occupied large areas of French territory. On June 22, 1940, France, reputed to have the strongest land army in Europe, had been at war with Germany for only 32 days. They were completely overrun by the German army. Up to this point, more than half of Europe had fallen entirely into German hands. This also caused Hitler to fall into an overwhelming arrogance. Hitler, who had been invincible in battle, would naturally not believe he could lose. Soon afterward, Hitler began formulating a maritime plan to invade Britain. Since Britain is separated from the European continent by the sea, Germany's blitzkrieg tactics simply couldn't be effective. Hitler decided to use the Air Force and Navy to completely defeat Britain, but he seemed to have forgotten the military strength of Britain's Navy and Air Force must be far stronger than Germany. On July 10, 1940, Hitler launched the Maritime Plan. The largest air battle in human history began. Planes from Britain and Germany fought fiercely over the skies of Britain. Both sides deployed a total of 8,000 aircraft. The battle lasted 4 months. The battle was fierce, unprecedented in human history. In the end, Britain achieved the final victory, dealing a heavy blow to Nazi Germany. As a result, Hitler was forced to shift his invasion targets. On June 22, 1941, Hitler suddenly tore up the Soviet-German Non-Aggression Pact. The three major German army groups, Gary with 3,400 tanks and 1,500 aircraft, a total of 3.5 million men, began a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. The unprepared Soviet Red Army suffered heavy losses. In just a few hours, 1,500 Soviet warplanes were destroyed, before they even took off by the German army. Under the Blitzkrieg offensive of the German army, the Soviet border air defense forces were almost completely wiped out. By September 1941, the Soviet Union had lost nearly 90 divisions. By this time, the German army had advanced more than 500 kilometers into the Soviet Union. Belarus and Lithuania in the Soviet Union, as well as most of Ukraine, had been successively occupied, and the forces were pressing straight towards the Soviet capital, Moscow. Then Stalin began mobilizing the entire nation to resist the German invasion. To boost the morale of the officers and soldiers, on November 7, Stalin held a grand military parade in Moscow's Red Square. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet Red Army troops began to be reviewed in Red Square, Moscow. The momentum of this do-or-die battle was simply unmatched. All the reviewed soldiers were about to head to the front line. Immediately after, Stalin dispatched the Siberian troops from the Far East region entirely to the Moscow front lines. From then on, the Battle of Moscow officially began. In this battle, the Soviet and German forces together committed 4 million troops. Casualties reached as high as 1.5 million. This was a battle for the survival of the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, the German army faced the coldest winter of the 20th century. Due to the extended German front lines, they suffered from shortages of equipment and supplies. This led to a disastrous defeat for Nazi Germany in this battle. Subsequently, Stalin launched a major counteroffensive. This offensive broke through the German defenses around Moscow and pushed them back 200 kilometers, not only shattering Hitler's 3-month occupation of the Soviet Union's arrogant plans, but also showing the world the Soviet Red Army's determination to defend their homeland. On December 7, 1941, Japan suddenly deployed 6 aircraft carriers and 440 planes to launch a surprise attack on the U.S. Pearl Harbor. Since the U.S. military was unprepared, during several hours of Japan's assault, 3,000 American soldiers were killed or wounded, 15 battleships and 170 aircraft were destroyed, while Japan lost more than 100 soldiers and 29 planes. The next day, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war on Japan. At the same time, he also declared war on Germany and Italy, who were also Axis powers. Thus, World War II reached its largest scale. In early 1942, Germany's ally, Italy, was defeated by the British in North Africa. Nazi Germany's leader, Hitler, selecting Rommel as the commander of the Afrika Korps, and deploying over 100,000 troops from the European front, they began heading to North Africa to support the Italian forces. Under the unstoppable advance of the German army, most of North Africa had fallen into the claws of Germany and Italy. Then, Hitler began to set his sights on the next target of invasion, aimed at Stalingrad in the Soviet Union, because this is the main production area of Soviet oil and coal. If Germany could quickly capture this place, the German army would have inexhaustible strategic resources, and gradually erode the Soviet Union. On July 17, 1942, the German army deployed a total of 1.5 million troops, assembling more than 100 divisions, viciously heading towards Stalingrad. Stalin urgently issued Order No. 227. Soldiers and officers are not allowed to retreat even a step. Violators will be shot on the spot. The fight between the Soviet Union and Germany unfolded over hundreds of kilometers of Stalingrad. The most brutal battle in human history has begun. In this battle, both the Soviet Union and Germany deployed over 5 million troops. The death toll even reached 3.5 million. Countless shells rained down on Stalingrad. Soldiers from both armies fought fiercely. On this land, soldiers rarely survived beyond 24 hours. Officers usually lasted no more than 3 days. At the fiercest, combat lasted no longer than 10 minutes. Both sides fought street by street and building by building. They all engaged in fierce competition. The intensity was obvious to all. In the end, the Soviet Red Army, with unwavering determination, secured victory in this battle. It was because of this battle that it became a turning point in World War II. Not only did they successfully halt the German offensive, but they also inflicted heavy losses on 1.5 million Nazi German troops. It was also the turning point when Nazi Germany shifted from prosperity to decline. From then on, the Soviet army took the strategic initiative from the Nazi forces. The scales of victory began to gradually tip toward the Soviet Union. In October of the same year, the British defeated the German army in the Battle of El Alamein in North Africa, putting Germany at a disadvantage in North Africa. In November, the British-American coalition took advantage of Germany's major defeat, and began launching landing operations in North Africa. Under the strong offensive of the Allies, they quickly captured large areas of North African territory. On March 17, 1943, the British-American Allied forces launched the Tunisia campaign. This battle lasted 2 months. At the start of the battle, the German and Italian forces achieved initial victories, but, due to the strong strategic resources of the Anglo-American Allies, and their superiority in supplies and numbers, the battlefield situation was completely reversed, causing the Axis forces to fall into defeat. After this battle, over 230,000 Italian and German soldiers were taken prisoner, and the Axis forces were completely driven out of North Africa. Shortly thereafter, the British and American allies launched an operation to eliminate Italy's fascist government. In July 1943, the Allies deployed nearly 500,000 troops to launch the invasion of Sicily, Italy. After a month of fighting, they finally took Sicily. This operation not only opened the door to Europe from the south of the continent, but also dealt a heavy blow to the Italian government, ultimately leading Italy to surrender. By this point, Hitler had realized that he needed to completely turn the tide of the situation. A decisive victory on the Eastern Front was essential. By July 5, 1943, the Soviet and German forces clashed in the Kursk region of the Soviet Union, marking the largest tank battle in history, known as the Battle of Kursk. In this battle, both sides gathered more than 8,000 tanks in total, and 5,000 aircraft, along with over 2.8 million soldiers. The scale of the conflict exceeded all expectations. Thousands of shells fired simultaneously, countless tanks, aircraft, and artillery piled up. Because the Soviet forces were overwhelmingly large, even if the German tank corps achieved a 1-to-3 kill/loss ratio, it was of no avail. On August 23, the Soviet Red Army successfully captured Kursk and the Kharkov region. This also marked the end of the Battle of Kursk. This war cost the German army 500,000 soldiers. They also suffered heavy losses in tanks, aircraft, and artillery. After this battle, the German army could no longer initiate large-scale offensives. From then on, the initiative on the Eastern Front was firmly in the hands of the Soviet Union. Starting in January 1944, the Soviet Red Army began launching continuous attacks against the Germans. They gradually recaptured large areas of territory. By June 5, the Supreme Commander of the Allied forces, Eisenhower, had secretly assembled 2.88 million troops in Britain, along with over 2,000 aircraft. On June 6, millions of Allied troops began landing in Normandy, France, launching the invasion. This operation was codenamed D-Day. Under fierce Allied aerial bombardment, the Normandy region is filled with smoke and fire. Countless bombs are falling from the sky. The German soldiers can only helplessly shoot toward the sky. The Allies have over 4,000 landing ships. They are rapidly sailing toward the Normandy beaches. Their battleships are almost firing all their guns. An unceasing bombardment is directed at the Normandy positions. The German positions instantly turned into a sea of fire, and most of the German troops, due to the lack of effective defenses, plus the suddenness of the attack, German forces suffered heavy losses, resulting in the Allies successfully landing in Normandy within a day. Under the unstoppable offensive of the Allied forces, the German army was defeated and retreated step by step. In just 2 months, the Anglo-American Allied forces pushed the Nazi German army back to the banks of the Seine River, and successfully liberated the French capital, Paris. On June 28, 1944, the Soviet Red Army on the Eastern Front launched the Operation Bagration. The Soviet Union assembled 2.4 million troops in the Belarus and Ukraine regions to launch a large-scale counteroffensive. Under the Red Army's powerful offensive, the German forces were left defenseless. In just 2 months, the Soviet Red Army advanced 550 kilometers and completely annihilated Germany's elite Central Army Group, recaptured territory from Russia and Ukraine, and advanced all the way to near the Polish border. At this time, Germany was trapped in a difficult situation, fighting on 2 fronts east and west. Due to prolonged combat, manpower was severely lacking, causing Nazi Germany's forces to sharply decrease, resulting in serious shortages of frontline soldiers. To solve this problem, Hitler began to forcibly launch a brutal conscription policy. All male civilians aged 14 to 20 had to join the military to defend their empire. According to Nazi high command, if all were mobilized, the army could reach an astonishing 10 million soldiers. But due to various issues, the final number of recruits only expanded to 2 million. Even the army experienced a serious aging problem. The brutal war can be said to have wiped out a generation of German youth. Even the weapons were very outdated, including civilian rifles and various crude arms. Even in the face of this devastating situation, Hitler still decided to fight the Allies to the end. After discussions among the German high command, Hitler decided to launch a large-scale counterattack, aimed at turning the tide of the battlefield. The German High Command planned to, in the Ardennes region on the Franco-German border, they launched another armored blitzkrieg, attempting to quickly break through the Allied lines, then push the Allies back to Dunkirk. They aimed to create another Dunkirk evacuation, using Germany's blitzkrieg tactics to sweep across Western Europe again, then turned to deal with the Soviet Union in the east. On December 16, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge has begun. This is Nazi Germany's final desperate counterattack before defeat, and also Hitler's last gamble in his military career. Over 300,000 German troops launched a surprise attack against 700,000 British and French forces. Under the German blitzkrieg offensive, the Allies were unable to organize an effective defense immediately, defeated and routed by the Nazi German army. But the Allies quickly mobilized large troops to fight fierce battles on every street and village. In the Ardennes region against the Nazi German forces, every step the Germans took forward came at a heavy cost. After prolonged fierce fighting, the Allies deployed nearly 1 million troops. Only then were the German forces finally pushed back to the German-French border. It was clear that Hitler's gamble this time had completely failed. From then on, Nazi Germany no longer had any chance to turn the tide. 1945 was arguably the darkest year for Germany. In the east, the Soviet army launched a furious counterattack, while in the west, the Allies pressed forward step by step. Hitler was not only unshaken, instead, he was unusually excited. He even dreamed of miracles happening. On January 12, 1945, Stalin mobilized the entire nation, a total of over 3 million people, more than 2,000 tanks, 1,200 aircraft, launched the Vistula-Oder offensive. Under the powerful offensive of the Soviet army, the German army was forced into a continuous retreat. In just 20 days, the Soviets completely occupied all of Poland, and advanced straight toward Nazi Germany itself. With the unstoppable momentum of the Soviet Red Army, the broadcasting station in Berlin started spreading false news to slander the Soviet Red Army, portraying the Soviet troops as beast-like and terrifying. This led to widespread fleeing among the German people fleeing in large numbers. However, the Soviet Red Army advanced with lightning speed. By February 10th, the Soviet Red Army had pushed forward 200 kilometers. They reached near the Oder River, only 70 kilometers away from Berlin, the German capital. Due to the continuous advance of the Soviet Red Army, many Soviet troops became exhausted. A lot of Soviet soldiers developed war weariness. Meanwhile, Hitler ordered the German army to fight desperately to ensure victory in the war. The supreme commander of the Soviet Red Army, Zhukov, began ordering the Soviet forces on the front line to rest and recuperate, thus suspending the offensive against the Nazi German army. In April 1945, the Soviet Union deployed over 5,000 aircraft to carry out continuous day and night bombings on Berlin, Germany. After weeks of bombing, the Soviet Red Army mobilized 2.6 million soldiers, launched a full-scale attack on Berlin. To defend the capital, Berlin, Hitler mobilized nearly all German soldiers, almost 800,000 troops. But facing the vastly superior equipment and numbers of the Soviet army, this was like a small wave meeting a big wave. Under the multi-front encirclement of the Soviet Red Army, Germany suffered heavy losses. Many German soldiers even chose to lay down their weapons and surrender to the Soviet troops. April 29th, the Soviet forces had already begun to push into the center of Berlin. Hitler knew he was cornered and doomed. He realized he was about to be defeated. April 30th, Hitler sat in the bunker filled with despair and reluctance. Died by shooting herself with her lover Eva. On April 30th, as the Soviet flag was planted on the Reichstag in Berlin, signifying the complete defeat of Nazi Germany. On May 2nd, German Field Marshal Kesselring signed the unconditional surrender. This also marked the end of the war. World War II. The fighting in Europe has completely ended. Only Japan in the Pacific is still putting up fierce resistance, but it won't last much longer. On July 26, 1945, the leaders of Britain, the US, and the USSR at the Potsdam Conference demanded Japan's unconditional surrender. Otherwise, Japan would face swift and complete destruction. But it was quickly rejected by Japan. So, with the approval of Britain and the Soviet Union, the United States dropped a big bomb on Hiroshima, a giant firework. 3 days later, the US dropped another big bomb on Nagasaki. These two big bombs, causing a total of 400,000 Japanese casualties. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced unconditional surrender, marking the full end of World War II. From 1939 to 1945, nearly 2 billion people from 61 countries were involved in the war, resulting in over 90 million casualties, determining the global landscape for the next 50 years. Deep technology has changed human history. What are your thoughts on this?